We're going to try to address two questions that were received here. One question and sort of one need I was going to fold in later this morning, but I think we'll do it right away. So, sort of combine two things at once here. One thing is I was asked about putting in place statistics regarding the income distribution or distribution of anything. So I'm going to show you how you can put in place a histogram for showing empirical observed distributions for certain quantities. Let's and I'm going to weave that in with a look at another user interface widget that you can put into your model, namely a button. Okay. Folks, we just as a reminder here, we have a model where we have this is the SIR agent-based calibration model, where we have some graph over time and the number of susceptibles that we've created. And how did that graph work? From whence did that data come for that graph? Where did it come from? It came from people. And from the what in people? It came from count susceptible, which was that something AnyLogic built in? No, we defined it. That was a statistic that we defined. And so we could have graphs dependent on the statistics that we can define. Okay? Important principle. Now let's suppose though that now let's suppose that we want to display a histogram of some information. Maybe it's say a histogram of the income of the population, or a histogram of over time, some quantity that's changed over time, like the number of people susceptible over time, or the number of people getting infected over time. How do we do that? Well, I'd like to look at each of those cases. So the key components that we're going to be using, does anyone want to guess where they are in the palette? They'll be in general, system dynamics, state chart analysis, presentation, controls. What would we use if we wanted to do histograms? Probably be in analysis. Yeah. In fact, if you look under analysis, you see two things of relevance. Histogram data and histogram chart. Okay. So as is typical for AnyLogic, we have some underlying data structure that will store our information, namely this histogram data, and then we'll have some mechanism in the form of a graph, a histogram graph that will visualize it, depict it. Okay. So we're going to make use of both of those here. And just to help drive home the principles, what we're going to do is look at two things. One thing where we're viewing a quantity that updates over time. We're doing a histogram of that. Another thing, a quantity which we may want to compute at a given time and do a histogram over the population at that time. Okay. What I'd like you to do is, first let's do the one of something that's changing over time. So without privileging it in any way and without loss of generality, what I'd like to do is to display a histogram of the number of susceptible people for each successive period of time. That's boring. I would rather do a flow statistic on the number of people getting infected per unit time, but time is a fleeting. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to drag in a histogram data object, and I'd like to call it empirical distribution of susceptibles, something like that. You can name it as you see fit. You'll just have to remember the name. You'll see that this histogram data object, this is typical in AnyLogic. It gives us a set of fields that we can fill in. The value of this, what do you think the value is? I'm trying to get you to think, as you would have to think if you were sitting in front of this. So if this were staring you in the face back at home, what would you fill in here? What would you fill in for the value? Where would you get, if you want to get information at a given time on the number of susceptibles, where can we go? Counter susceptibles in the in people. People dot count susceptibles. Boom. Where did that come from? Brought home this point. Where did that come from? It came from us. We created that, remember? It was a statistic we created. So we could have called it count children at risk, and we got that count children at risk here. Okay? So that was the name of the statistic. Okay. So we're getting it from people. It takes care of computing all the statistics. Okay? Okay, and we here are going to you'll notice we can pick whether we want a probability mass function here or a cumulative distribution function. We'll just leave it as a standard probability mass function. You notice it says update data automatically, whether or not we want to do that. Yeah, we'll say we'll update data automatically. Okay, so update every, how often? 1 day. Okay, so each successive day we will add data into our histogram on the number of susceptibles thus far. It'll fall into a set of bins, and in fact, the bins are things that, if we want to, we can define here. So we can define fixed width bins, for example, from 0 to some maximum, or we can have it be automatically detected. Let's just do it automatically detected for the moment. Okay. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's not what we need, and we want to specify it manually. Okay. You'll notice there's a number of intervals here. Do you see that? Number of intervals here, and maybe we'll change that to 20. So we can specify the number of bins in the histogram, the number of sort of successively larger categories that we'll be dividing things into. Okay. Okay. So and there seem to be uniformly uniform width, as I understand it. Okay. So this is our data. And then let's go create a histogram of this data. So we drag in here histogram, and we'll call it histogram empirical distribution of susceptibles, something like that. Naming is important, so it's nice to do that. And it's asking, should it show the CDF or the PDF? In this case, sort of more of a probability mass function. And then we're going to have to say, do we add histogram data in? We're going to have to specify a source of data. Yeah, so we add histogram data in, and we're going to say what we're plotting here. We'll say we're plotting susceptibles, okay? And it's asking for a histogram. What do you think we enter for the histogram? Empirical distribution. Who needs a TA help here? Who needs TAs? The TAs, so there's a TA needed in the back. A further TA. Who needs a TA? They stand ready? Okay. Just raise your hand if you need a TA. So the histogram, we're going to put in, we're going to have it referred to our empirical distribution. In other words, the object we just created, empirical distribution, that this thing here, this data, histogram data object, okay? And then we'll have this thing update automatically. We'll have it update maybe every 10 days. We'll have it update. Well, let's say every 1 day. We'll have it update every 1 day, just as frequently as the underlying data. So there's a distinction between how often does the data get updated to each successive interval, and how often do we display it. And at some point you want to be a bit careful about load. Okay, so who else do people need me to dwell more on that particular one? This chart? Oh, you mean here? It's a good question. This is just a depiction. I wish I could say something about why they chose this icon. I don't think it's I don't. That makes no sense. Well, 10 values. I guess it does total up to about 100%. And so this is the fraction of all cases that fall within this given width, this given bin, I suppose. But it's not a terribly nice drawing. Yeah, I agree. So let's drag this thing so it's a bit larger, so we can see it and see it more clearly. And now let's run it and see, because this is just a placeholder image, and I agree it's not a particular inspiring one. Okay, so here we have data being placed in. Let's run it out quite a bit faster. And here what we see is the number of times that the number of susceptibles falls within different categories. And over time, the number of susceptibles came down. So, you know, it's in a number of, it falls in a number of bins over time with respect to that. More to the point, if you go click up here in this empirical distribution of susceptibles, you'll find that that it lists the number of bins here and the number of times that a given value fell within those bins. Okay, so we could copy this, right-click on it, copy it, and we can paste it into a Excel spreadsheet, and we'll get a sort of listing of the histogram here, how many times it fell into different value categories. Okay, so that's a quantity which is changing over time in a histogram. Any questions there? Okay, so the next thing I'd like to do, so this would be